Remembering an American icon, United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away at the age of 87. We take a look back at her life, legacy, and the political fallout from her death. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The daughter of Jewish immigrants and a lifelong champion of gender equality, Ruth Bader Ginsburg shattered glass ceilings for women in the legal profession to land a seat on this country's highest court, where she continued her fight for women's rights, gay rights, healthcare, immigration, and civil rights. Thousands of mourners continue to gather at the steps of the Supreme Court to pay tribute to this trailblazer. But the seat left vacant has touched off a political storm as well, with less than 45 days to go before one of the most consequential presidential races in U.S. history. Let's go now to CGTN's Owen Fairclough, who is live at the Supreme Court. Owen, tributes continue to pour in from across the country and around the world. Talk to us about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's impact and tell us about the services planned for later this week.
Well, Anand, I'm struggling to think of any other Supreme Court justice around the world who's had action dolls made in their likeness, but such was the reverence for Ruth Bader Ginsburg that her supporters are preparing for a fourth night of vigils at the US Supreme Court. Behind me, you can see some of the ambience there, people peacefully gathering to pay their respects to, as you say, a feminist icon who was a champion of all manner of causes, from gay rights to supporting abortion, to healthcare, and any manner of causes for the disenfranchised. Very much the leading liberal voice on the US Supreme Court, a woman who in later life became known as the notorious RBG in tribute to the gangster rapper of the 1990s. Talk about a people's judge, although I have to say we've got a diet of classic soul here at the moment for the tributes outside the Supreme Court. It was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dying wish, according to her family, that no successor be nominated until after the election. But there's no chance of that, according to US President Donald Trump and his Republican Party, who are moving as quickly as they can now to find a successor, nominate a successor, and have that successor in place before the election. It was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's very wish that voters should have some say through the ballot box on who the next Supreme Court justice should be. This would be President Trump's third conservative nominee if it goes through, and would give the Supreme Court an unassailable 6-3 conservative majority. So you can see how important this is for Republicans. You can see how important this is for Democrats as well, who are saying it simply isn't fair, and that that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's wishes should be respected, and this should not happen until after the election of November the 3rd. Anand.
Oh, and as you say, President Trump is wasting no time. President Trump, I should say, and the Republicans are wasting no time in trying to get their nominee through. What are the steps that this requires?
Well, that's right. You made the very important distinction there, Anand, that President Trump nominates a Supreme Court justice, and he said that he wants a woman to replace Justice Bader Ginsburg. He has 5 candidates in mind. But of course, it's up to the US Senate to vote on that nominee. Now, there is a slim majority by the Republicans in the US Senate, but here's where the maths does get complicated, Anand. If it's not complicated already, the Republicans have a majority, but there are 4 moderates who've indicated in the past that they wouldn't support a Supreme Court justice nomination during an election year, and certainly not so close to an election now when we're just over a month or so away. So those 4 moderates, Republicans, really hold the key to this because they can undermine that majority. We know 2 of them for sure have already been on record recently saying they won't support this nomination. 2 others include Mitt Romney, who ran against President Barack Obama in 2012 and lost. We haven't heard officially from him in the last couple of days about specifically where he stands, but essentially this will come down to 4 Republican senators. Anand.
Thanks, Owen. That's CGTN's Owen Fairclough at the United States Supreme Court. Well, there is lots to discuss. Let's bring in our panel, all of our guests here with us in Washington tonight. Eleanor Clift is a political columnist for the Daily Beast. Bruce Fein is a constitutional lawyer and the former general counsel for the Federal Communications Commission under U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Ameshia Cross is a Democratic Party strategist and commentator, and Bill Schneider is professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Welcome to all of you. Eleanor Clift, let me start with you. As we've been saying, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was an icon, a widely respected jurist, not just here in the United States, but around the world. But it didn't come easy for her. She faced major challenges. Because she was a woman, she couldn't get a job with any of the major law companies after she finished law school, where she finished top of the class. She couldn't get a job as a teacher. Give us a sense of how she overcame all of that to reach the top position on the Supreme Court here.
Yes, 4 generations of women in this country, young, old, middle-aged, I think we're all mourning her because there's a recognition of how much she endured in her life and how she methodically worked changes through the Supreme Court to alter the attitude about gender in this country. I mean, one small thing, when a secretary told her in the 70s that when you talked about sex discrimination, it made male judges uneasy, and she changed the language to gender, and now gender is certainly a commonly used word. She was one of only 9 women in her Harvard law class, and she was married by that time and had a young child. And her husband, became a well-respected tax attorney. He got cancer when they were students. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg had the full care of their young daughter, her own coursework in a very competitive environment, and she took notes for her husband so he didn't fall behind. She eventually got a law degree from Columbia, but as you point out, she couldn't get a job, even after the dean of the Harvard Law School wrote a letter to Justice Frankfurter, who was a very esteemed judge at the time, recommending her, and he said, I'm impressed by her, but she's a woman, and I don't hire women. You could say that out loud then, and it was a completely accepted term. So, a list of her litigation, you can see all the steps that she pioneered to get us to where we are today. So, women in the country owe a huge gratitude to her, and the fact that she became this sort of rap star icon in her 80s really, I think, indicates an awakened interest in the law and in what the law is able to do when people get behind it and there is activism in the land. And certainly we see a lot of activism around this upcoming election.
Right, she certainly did reach across generations as well. Bruce Fein, of course, United States Supreme Court justices have lifetime tenure, and they leave their imprint on the court as well as the nation, of course. What were some of her landmark decisions and rulings that you remember?
I think if we step back a little bit, her record is similar to Thurgood Marshall, who was arguing civil rights cases, Brown against the board, and he set the stage for the civil rights revolution that he participated in as a justice of the Supreme Court. And it can be similarly said that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as an advocate, she pioneered the heightened scrutiny of gender discrimination in a case called Reed versus Reed in 1971. It was followed by a whole cluster of additional cases. And then it reached its capstone when she, on the bench, authored the decision in the VMI case holding that gender discrimination in military academies were unconstitutional. I think that is where her greatest imprint is, and it's quite amazing that her advocacy and opinions on the Supreme Court basically were the equivalent of the Equal Rights Amendment that was initially passed in 1972, never ratified by the 3/4 threshold, but she almost unilaterally created an Equal Rights Amendment through the development of jurisprudence regarding gender discrimination. But she was also, generally speaking, very sensitive to women in the workplace. In fact, there's a statute really named after her dissent in one of these cases where women were complaining that their pensions were shortchanged because over a period of time there was discrimination in the workplace, and the court said, well, limitations period, you couldn't have a remedy when it came too late, even if you didn't know when the discrimination began. And the statute was enacted that followed exactly what Justice Ginsburg had prescribed as a remedy in her dissent, saying this is totally unfair to women. How can you tell them that they've pled their case too late when they didn't even know when the discrimination began because it was hidden by their employers? But on the whole, her jurisprudence generally was very, very strongly in favor of individual rights and liberties, and that is, I think, a record that will endure.
Bill Schneider, you've covered politics in Washington for a very long time. You're a veteran political reporter working for some of the most prestigious news organizations. What do you believe will be her lasting legacy?
Well, lasting legacy is clearly going to be women's equality, rights for women. She was a pioneer in that field, coming up at a time when a lot of rights for women were denied and women were scoffed at. They weren't offered jobs. They couldn't get into schools. There was a time when if a woman applied to a law school, the dean would simply say, we can't admit you. Why should we educate you, a woman? The minute you get out of here, you're going to get married and you won't practice law. It'll be a waste of money. I should point out that she didn't just defend women. She defended gender equality. In one case, she actually criticized a Social Security law which denied benefits to widowers, that is to male fathers, who were taking care of small children, minor children. The law denied benefits to the father because it said he could make money on his own, but it gave benefits to a widow, to a woman whose husband had passed away. That, too, violated gender equality, and she won that case. She argued that the benefits should be the same for a widow or a widower.
Ameshia, when you hear all of this, you are a political activist, a political operative. When you hear this, how big an inspiration do you think she will be to young people in the country, especially women?
Absolutely. As a millennial, one of the things that I learned about Ruth Bader Ginsburg years ago was her activism towards women and women's equality, but specifically everything that that encompasses her legacy around what she fought for women. Because I think that we have to put into context that this wasn't 60, 70, 80 years ago. She was fighting for many of these things 20, 15 years ago. She was one of the harbingers of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. She stood for not only women's equality, but also a woman's right to choose. She stood for ensuring that women felt safe in the workplace and that women were able to get loans for homes. One of the greatest reasons that women have women's home ownership has gone up is because of people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who made it possible for women to go to banks and get loans without having a husband or without having a male cosigner. She made it possible for women to enjoy their independence and to fully be taken into consideration as humans without having a male standing next to them or without having someone to be able to speak on their behalf. She felt as though women had a voice and that voice should be used. And I think that, you know, for the acolytes of hers, the young people who came later, the AOCs in Congress even, when we see something like this and we have a woman who was willing to risk it all in a time where it was not popular, to be someone who was progressive at a time where she was often the sole voice standing alone, to fight for these things, I think that that is the legacy that she'll have. And for women, people of color, for immigrants' rights, for so many things that she stood for holistically, we are honoring her. I know I went to actually pay my respects a couple of days ago in D.C., but I think that we're seeing people across the country showcase just how much RBG meant. And for people who are currently college students or high school students who are sharing all of this love and affection over social media, I think that that says something, because we have not in American history seen that for a Supreme Court justice before.
Right.
This is a different type of revolution.
Yeah, just one point there, you mentioned civil rights. How big a loss will her death be to the cause in America of civil rights and other rights like that in the country?
I think it's going to be a massive loss. It's going to be a massive loss because having someone on the Supreme Court who had a heart, who had a courage, who had an understanding of civil rights in the grand scheme of things and what it meant long-term and long-range in this country and to the protection of our democracy and Constitution, she was that voice. And I think that it's going to be very hard for a lot of people to see a future beyond what she was able to do, because we have such a contentious election coming up. We have judges that are being positioned to possibly take that place who are nothing in terms of resemblance of the things that she actually fought and stood for. So a lot of people are actually afraid.
Eleanor, of course, we now have a political battle brewing over who will succeed Justice Ginsburg. This was the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, talking about the death of Justice Ginsburg. Let's listen to him.
It's hard to believe, but it was my honor to preside over her confirmation hearing. I got to meet her at the time, and she and her ascension to the Supreme Court. In the decades since, she has been absolutely consistent and reliable and a voice for freedom and opportunity for everyone. Her opinions and her dissent are going to continue to shape the basis for a law for a generation.
So, Eleanor, how do you see this political battle right now playing out in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, the Republicans have the votes to push through the president's nominee. The question is whether they can get everything together before the election or after the election. It strikes me that the Democrats are going to try to slow this down as best they can and delay the vote until after the election. And it's a big if Joe Biden wins the presidency and if the Democrats take the Senate, the Republicans can still push through their nominee in the lame duck congressional session, which is the old Senate. But the Democrats would really shame them as seeing this as an illegitimate appointment. And nobody has yet mentioned that in 2016, Justice Scalia, a very prominent justice, very conservative, and quite a beloved member of the court also, died, I think it was in February of 2016, and the Republicans held the seat open for 14 months because they wanted to let the next president make the selection, and they argued that the people should speak. Now, they found lots of rationales for why somehow this year is different, and yet we're only 40 some odd days away from the election. But they have the votes. There's nothing in the Constitution that says they can't do it. But how this plays out politically and how a cloud of uncertainty or illegitimacy over a pick that could come in the wake of an election where the president who nominates her, and it will be a woman, has been defeated and discredited. How that plays out in history, I don't really know.
Right.
But I think Democrats feel that this is an election of mobilization, and Democrats are very impassioned over this seat right now, and looks like it could drive turnout, even higher than it was. Now, the other side is passionate also, so I don't know that it's equal, but I've never seen Democrats this incensed about a seat, and it's about Merrick Garland's seat in 2016 in addition to this seat. In their minds, it's 2 stolen seats.
Bruce Fein, both President Trump and Joe Biden have been talking about the political fight. Let's listen very briefly to what they had to say.
We have an obligation. We won, and we have an obligation as the winners to pick who we want.
To jam this nomination through the Senate is just an exercise in raw political power.
So, Bruce, there we heard President Trump say, we can pick whom we want, and his presidential opponent, Joe Biden, saying that this is an exercise in raw political power. And the United States Constitution, as Eleanor just pointed out to us, gives the right to the president to nominate a United States Supreme Court justice. The U.S. Senate has the advise and consent function. That's pretty clear. So why does this battle brew up when it's very clear in the Constitution?
It's because there are political traditions and what you might call the spirit of the Constitution that is equally important to the letter. And one thing that Mr. Trump omitted was that President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 confronted a vacant seat when Roger Brooke Taney, the Chief Justice, died literally 3 weeks before the election. And he deferred making any appointment. He could have even done a recess appointment until after the election. So even though he had the raw power to fill the seat immediately, he did not do so. Now, there's kind of a wild card that's permitted by the Constitution that would be risky, but certainly would be constitutional. The last time and the most notorious time when a political party tried to manipulate the judicial process for partisan purposes was the Midnight Judges Act of 1801. Thomas Jefferson had shellacked John Adams at the 1800 election. And the Federalist Party thought that they could cling to power if they created all these new judgeships, 16. And they did so, filled them all before Jefferson's inauguration. But his Republican Congress repealed the statute. The 16 judgeships were terminated and abolished. And the Supreme Court, in a case called Stewart and Laird, 1803, said, yes, Congress has the authority to abolish judgeships, which could include Supreme Court judges. When Andrew Johnson was president in the aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, the Radical Reconstruction Congress did not want him to get any Supreme Court appointments, and so it reduced the number of justices from 10 to 7. And when he left office, then it jumped the number to 9, where it has stayed for 150 years, so U.S. Grant could fill those vacancies. So it is constitutional.
Yeah.
Trump went forward in a lame duck session to appoint a justice to fill Ginsburg's seat, that a Democratic Congress could abolish the seat in toto, or could enlarge the number of seats, something that Roosevelt did, but it didn't quite work out politically at that time for him, to order to counteract what Trump had done. So the Constitution gives flexibility for the Democrats to retaliate if Mr. Trump moves forward in a lame duck session.
Okay. Bill Schneider, you know, we've been talking about the Republicans blocking President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland. This is what Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, said in Congress. Let's listen.
The next justice could fundamentally alter the direction of the Supreme Court and have a profound impact on our country. So, of course, the American people should have a say. I think it is also safe to say the next president, whoever that may be, is going to be the person who chooses the next Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, Bill, I should have added, of course, that Mitch McConnell was making those comments at the time when President Obama nominated Merrick Garland. There's a healthy dose of cynicism and hypocrisy in what he was saying. But I'm looking beyond that. You know, as Bruce Fein talks about the letter of the law, there's politics as well. And I'm wondering to what extent how that will be viewed, how the Republicans' actions will be viewed right now, because this is a deeply polarized country. Will this deepen divisions and really change the way in which people view politics in the country?
In a word, yes, because the Supreme Court is at the center of some of the hottest and the most divisive issues in American politics. Abortion, Obamacare, same-sex marriage, women's rights, civil rights, affirmative action. All of those measures are endangered by the appointment of the successor to Ruth Ginsburg and a solid conservative majority on the court. It would be 6 Republican appointees and 3 Democratic appointees. All of those things are put in at risk if the Republican Senate has their way and appoints the successor to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which under the Constitution they can, but it's likely to produce a tremendous voter backlash. All of those measures, most of those measures have built a certain legitimacy in American politics, and that would instantly be erased by a conservative majority.
Ameshia, what are the options that the Democrats have right now to block this? You know, I heard this morning one of the options being looked at is to actually impeach President Trump. So that will throw a spanner in the works of the Senate's functions. I think that Bruce Fein mentioned this a moment ago. Most of what the Democrats can do is actually available after the fact, with whether that is packing the court or whether that is further delegitimizing whoever the appointee happens to be. In the interim, because the Democrats do not have the Senate, this becomes very difficult. Now, I do think that there are some backroom conversations going on to make sure that they can get that
that magic 4 number of Republicans who will stand against this vote. But I think that right now what the Democrats are doing and what we saw with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a $90 million fundraising overhaul in just 26 hours post her death. That $90 million went to presidential campaigns and went to down ballot races, including the Senate, because what Democrats know is that should President Trump and the Republican Party choose someone right now, what's going to end up happening is that someone is not going to be like Chief Justice John Roberts right now. This is someone who President Trump is going to choose who goes very hard against immigration reform and makes it a lot harder for asylum seekers as well as undocumented immigrants. Someone who dismantles Obamacare. Someone who fundamentally changes the rules and the regulations around women's rights in the workplace, but also women's rights holistically when we're talking about reproductive rights. President Trump and the Republican Party want to make sure that they eradicate basically all of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy, but also shift the course of this court for at least 2 more generations. And I think that that's the detrimental effect. And Democrats know that because we do not have the Senate right now, this is going to be a very hard thing to defeat. But I don't think that the majority of Democrats would actually support another round of impeachment. A lot of that conversation is from more of the progressive wing of the party, a lot smaller version of the party writ large, because we saw what happened with impeachment last go round. It didn't fire up the base. It in many ways backfired against Democrats, and I don't think Democrats are willing to do that right now. Okay.
Eleanor, how will this affect the election? And I'm thinking not just about the presidential race, but also what we call the down ballot races. I mean, as Ameshia just mentioned, the Democrats don't have the Senate right now. There are a number of senators who will be up for election on November 3rd as well. How will that affect them?
I think it scrambles every race, and not all races are the same. I think like in North Carolina, the Senate candidate there, the Republican, he's running for re-election, Tom Tillis, had been faltering. Now he's grabbed on to fill that seat, which is the chant at the Trump rallies. He's grabbed onto that like a lifeline, and he's less popular in North Carolina than President Trump. So for somebody like Susan Collins, she is not supporting of an early vote. She has counted on women crossing party lines to support her. She's lost a lot of that already. So she does better sort of standing apart. But the money that's now going to flood into these down ballot races, as the other panelists pointed out, because corporate America would like the Senate to remain in Republican control. But I don't think anybody knows where the intensity is. I happen to think it's more on the Democratic side, and I think Republicans are making a false gamble with this, thinking this is going to put the president over the top. But hey, he's not talking about the coronavirus. Neither is anybody else for a few days, and that's a victory for Donald Trump.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.